Instead, Lee is presently in the midst of filming The Game of Death, what he terms a multi-level film, in which his personal philosophy of martial art is being presented for the first time. He's returning to this film after a brief hiatus, having spent the fall of the previous year filming 3 sequences, the finale, it turns out, of the film. Lee performs the work and assumes the responsibility of 8 people in the creation of this film. He's the director, the producer, the choreographer, the author of the screenplay, in addition to having a hand in set design, the cinematography, and the lighting of the film. And of course, he's the leading actor. Martial artists who are not accustomed to the camera must be taught how to sell a strike or a reaction for optimal dramatic effect. Again, this falls to Lee to look after. Take after take of precision martial art choreography is performed. Lee will spend, in some instances, up to 4 days filming what will turn out to be only a 5-minute fight sequence. Lee is most demanding of himself. In this shot, involving his handling a nunchaku, an ancient Oriental weapon that was originally used as a rice flail, Lee will shoot no less than 10 takes to capture one small sequence that will appear on screen for a mere 3.5 seconds. He wants his films to have the stamp of realism and believability. Filming of The Game of Death is suspended in October of 1972 when word reaches the set that Warner Brothers is now interested in co-producing his next film. It will mark the first time in the history of East-West relations that a Chinese and American film studio work together on a motion picture. Lee views the co-production as a step toward raising global understanding of Chinese culture and of having Chinese films accepted into the international market.
Did you look at many Mandarin movies before you started playing in the first one?
Yes.
What did you think of them when you saw them?
Quality-wise, I mean, I have to admit that it's not quite up to the standard. However, it is growing, and it is getting higher and going toward that standard, than what I would term quality.
Lee and his business partner, Raymond Chow, fly to Los Angeles in November of 1972 to complete negotiations with Warner Brothers for what will prove to be Lee's last and biggest film, Enter the Dragon. January to April of 1973, Lee gives over to the filming of Enter the Dragon. Again, he will oversee every aspect of its production and post-production. By the time his schedule allows him to resume working on additional ideas for The Game of Death, it's mid-July of 1973, the final week of his life. July 20th, his last day on Earth, he will spend discussing script ideas for the film. On this fateful day, Lee will, in characteristic optimism, look ahead to September 20th, 1973. He will write in his daytime diary for this date of his intention to resume filming The Game of Death. These will prove to be the last words he will ever write. Lee's passing hits the residents of Hong Kong like a tidal wave. Disbelief, shock, anger. There was so much more the young man had to accomplish, so much he had to live for, and now, nothing. Ironically, during an audio dictation that Lee makes only weeks prior to his passing, he comments on this very distinction between his films and those made by other, less dedicated production companies.
I can tell you that as more Bruce Lee's films are shown, the audience will soon realize not only in acting ability, but in physical skill as well, they will see the difference.
5 years after his passing, excerpts from the film that Lee had worked so feverishly on during the final months and hours of his life are edited into a film featuring Lee's title, Game of Death. But the film bears no comparison to Lee's original multi-level vision. Without Lee's choreography notes, script outline, and motif, the producers are uncertain what to do with the 100 minutes of footage they have in their possession. Moreover, they discover that Lee was such a perfectionist that of the 100 minutes of footage they have in hand, 2/3 turn out to be outtakes and retakes, shots that Lee himself had discarded for sequences in the film that he felt were beneath his standard of quality. They deem only 11 minutes and 7 seconds of the footage to be worthy of inclusion in their film. The rest, approximately 21 minutes worth, they discard. Intercutting actual footage of Lee into fight sequences involving lookalikes and even using cardboard cutouts of Lee's head, the end result is viewed by many as an exploitive and grotesque joke played on the great artist's legacy. By now, even Lee's most zealous fans are beginning to believe that the original footage is gone and that it will never be possible to see the footage Lee shot in its entirety, nor to ever learn what his original storyline for the film was. In the fall of 1994, during research conducted for a multi-volume book series based on Lee's surviving writings, Lee's original script and choreography writings for The Game of Death are recovered. The writings confirm what had long been suspected, that Lee had indeed shot considerably more footage for The Game of Death than had been seen to date. Another unexpected surprise is discovered in among his choreography writings, his handwritten storyline. 12 pages in length and containing all scene breakdowns and select dialogue passages, the original storyline stands in sharp contrast to the one presented in the film released under the same name. After the discovery of Lee's script notes, a search to find the missing footage is launched. It will last some 6 years. But then, the miraculous happens. The original 35mm film footage is located. After having been separated for over 1/4 of a century, Bruce Lee's original footage and script notes are finally reunited. Over the course of this film, you'll see this footage as Bruce Lee had intended for it to be shown, and you'll also come to understand the struggle he had to undergo in order to bring it to the big screen. And perhaps along the way, you'll come to know the real Bruce Lee, the man behind the legend, a little better as well.
I believe that this background of research and the building of a philosophy of Jeet Kune Do is what Bruce intended to relate through The Game of Death. He had an idea of how he wanted to show the martial arts to the viewing public. These various steps in finding your own way in martial arts. The different styles and what styles mean, and more importantly, what they don't mean. That was Bruce's big message, the style of no style. And Game of Death was going to be the platform for these expressions.
While we may never know how the film would have turned out had Bruce Lee lived, we do know with unimpeachable certainty the vision that he had for the movie during the time he was filming its finale. According to Lee's 12-page storyline, he would play a retired, undefeated martial arts champion by the name of Hai Tien, who had been approached by members of the Korean underworld to take part in a daring raid on a 5-story pagoda said to contain a valuable treasure on its uppermost level. When he refuses to participate, his sister and younger brother are kidnapped, leaving him no option but to take part in the raid. At a briefing at the boss's home, Hai Tien is introduced to his accomplices in the raid, all of them highly trained martial artists. The boss screens a reconnaissance film of the temple area, explaining to the accomplices that since guns are prohibited in the village, the pagoda is guarded by martial arts mercenaries, one on each level of the pagoda. Their instructions are to fight their way to the top of the pagoda and retrieve the treasure. Lee selected the Buddhist temple of Pope Jusaw as the setting for the film. The temple's most striking object, the 33-meter-high Buddha statue, is clearly indicated in Lee's storyline sketches. Cast in one mold with 150 tons of bronze, it's said to be the largest such standing figure in all of Asia. In front of the Buddha is the 5-story wooden pagoda that Bruce Lee had chosen as the backdrop for the climactic battles in the film.
Thus, the idea started from there. He took some of the ideas he had been gathering about the levels of martial arts combat in the pagoda and Kareem came out, and I believe that the first scenes that they shot were the fight scenes between Bruce and Kareem.
The first day's rushes, after we saw those, we had to slow everything down because we were moving too fast and it looked too jerky on the film, and we had to slow it down so the film could follow, so the camera could follow us, and people could see things, because we were doing things like we practiced it, and I practiced with Bruce. We do several things in a split second, and the audience would miss the subtleties of what he was trying to do if we didn't slow it down.
Of what were to be his accomplices in the film, Lee wanted one to be slightly devious and antagonistic toward his character. This would create an interesting dynamic in the relationship between the two men, not letting the audience know whether or not Lee's partner was actually with him or against him. For the role of the antagonistic accomplice, Lee chose James Tien, an actor who had appeared with Lee in 2 of his previous 3 films in Hong Kong. The second accomplice was to be a strong but simple-minded martial artist. These would be character attributes that would allow for a different type of dynamic to occur between the accomplices as they fought their way up each level of the pagoda. Lee ultimately settled on Hong Kong stuntman Che Yun to play the role of this accomplice. It would be the first time these two had worked together. At the time of filming, the rest of Lee's accomplices had not been decided. Within the pagoda, Lee and his accomplices would have to battle upwards past 5 levels, each guarded by a martial artist of a particular style. The first level was to be guarded by Wong In-sik, who was to be portrayed as a master of a kicking style. Wong had worked with Lee before, appearing as one of his opponents in The Way of the Dragon. Lee had chosen his real-life senior-most student, Taki Kimura, to play the guardian of the second floor. According to Kimura, Lee wanted him to utilize praying mantis gung fu, as well as some elements of Wing Chun, both arts that emphasize infighting, use of hands predominantly, with kicks limited to below the waist.
And I think it was in October of 70, 71, 72, in that era. He called me and said that he wanted me to be in the movies, and in that movie. And again, I said, look, Bruce, I said, I got 2 left front feet, you know it and I know it, and there's probably 1,000 people over in Hong Kong that do it better than I can. I said, just let me sit here and enjoy the fruits of your success. And because I said, you know me, I said, I don't need to be in that. And he said, no, he said, I want you in it. He said, I'm the technical director and the co-producer. He said, don't worry about it. So I reluctantly, for fear that he'd kick my butt if I said no at that point, I said, okay. He'd already sent me an airline ticket. But really, I think at this point in his life, I think he had transcended all the gimmicks that, that are usually in these movies. And I think that he had gotten to that plateau where you could just simply do the simple, normal things and yet create that excitement within that simplicity.
Lee selected another of his real-life students, Dan Inosanto, to be guardian of the 3rd floor, as he was not only adept in Lee's art of Jeet Kune Do, but in addition was also an advanced practitioner in the arts of Kenpo Karate and Filipino Eskrima. Lee opted to have Inosanto employ methods from both arts, which he believed would add an exciting visual element to the film and serve to break up the unarmed combat sequences. Inosanto was also a brilliant exponent of the nunchaku, allowing Lee to film the first ever nunchaku battle between 2 opponents. Grappling or joint locking would also serve to add a fresh visual element to the fight sequences. For this reason, Lee settled on Korean Hapkido Grandmaster Ji Hon-jae, who at the time of filming was a 7th degree black belt in the art. Ji would be the guardian of the 4th level of the pagoda.
Andrews Air Force Base, I did their teaching time. Jun Lee, Taekwondo master Jun Lee, he have international karate championship. I be there like a demonstration. Then that time Jun Lee introduced me Bruce Lee. I showed, he looked at my technique, then he liked my technique. That's why he come to the Andrews Air Force Base. He learned the several techniques. Then he go back to Hong Kong, he invited me.
Lee decided to have yet another of his students, Karim Abdul-Jabbar, play the role of the guardian of the highest floor of the pagoda. He fights with an unknown style, which symbolized the highest level of martial art. This unknown style was the essence of Jeet Kune Do.
I was at the top of the pagoda because you know, I was the most effective fighter, and I didn't have any style. And I was also in a place where my strengths were enhanced by the environment, so it was dark in there. I was supposed to be light sensitive. My eyes were light sensitive, and that was a problem for me. But other than that, I was an incredible human specimen, etc. That was the whole idea about it. And he started knocking out the panes in the walls, so that more light came in, and I couldn't see. And that's when he got his advantage in the fight.
The fact that Lee's character in the Game of Death would be taking on advocates of different styles on each level of the temple was significant in a larger context than might be initially evident, for Lee was not just taking on the various exponents of particular styles, but the very notion of styles itself.
I think it's evident in the Game of Death how he planned to fight a person of a different style, a very precise style, on each floor of the pagoda, and show how he could fit in with anybody else's style, thus having no style of his own.
In the battle of the third floor, Lee's character makes use of a green bamboo whip. The whip represents flexibility, an attribute which Lee felt a martial artist must possess if he was to be successful in combat. Since combat, like life, is not predictable, Lee held that one must possess a pliable adaptability in order to change with change. Lee has his character dressed in a one-piece yellow tracksuit to symbolize no affiliation with any known martial arts style.
I think the wearing of the yellow tracksuit was an expression of how he felt about the martial arts, that you need not be dressed in a traditional uniform in order to be an effective fighter. That yellow tracksuit is something that's comfortable, it's flexible, you can move without restriction, and so I think that was why he chose that.
With his cast now firmly in place, Lee spends the next 3 months of his life, from August to October of 1972, putting his martial vision on celluloid.
Bruce was a perfectionist on a film set. He always choreographed all of his own fights in detail, writing them down, every movement, every single movement, rehearsing them endlessly with the stuntmen, and having many, many takes so that it was always just perfect. And Bruce was very aware of how camera angles worked in fight scenes. I visited him on the Game of Death set on more than one occasion. The children, Brandon and Shannon, and I were always welcome on the film sets, and we enjoyed going there because he was having a lot of fun with it. First of all, Kareem was his good friend, as was Dan Inosanto, and some of the other martial artists as well were his good friends. And he had worked with them many times in the past. As you know, Kareem was his student, Dan was his student and assistant instructor. And so he had a real fun time working with these fellows and constructing the fight scenes.
The results are 3 carefully crafted and meaningful sequences that resonate on many different levels, as well as the most graceful and dynamic presentation of the human form in hand-to-hand combat ever captured on film.